When Delbert and Jenny Hill married in 1992, they were like so many Christian couples. They both had a lot of hang-ups from difficult childhoods, and they both believed that marriage would be the doorway into a brand new kind of life. And they were both severely disappointed when they found out that marriage cannot change a lustful heart or satisfy a longing soul.
So I had been tormented my whole life with this dark secret in my life of sin, and then I married, hoping that this would provide a sense of normality, and that I would be the normal Christian and the normal Christian family, but the loneliness and the emptiness just escalated, and then I just found myself in a very dark place.
I came into this marriage believing that Delbert could fix this alone feeling. My thought being if I wasn't alone, I wouldn't feel alone. And it only took a couple months for me to recognize that that wasn't the case. He wasn't going to be that answer. But out of that, I began to see all this sinful behavior that I didn't even know was in me. Jealousy, anger, manipulation, controlling. And I realized I didn't want to be this way, but I also knew I couldn't fix it either.
As the years passed, they only became more and more miserable. Their friends and family saw them as a model Christian couple, heavily involved in leading Sunday school and worship. But this couldn't have been further from the truth. Jenny was still plagued by feelings of isolation, and Delbert by the inner torment of a lust-filled life. Eventually, after 10 years of marriage, Delbert decided that he'd had enough. He would leave Jenny and the children and give himself over to his sin.
So after Delbert had left and been gone for about 6 months, he returned with somewhat of a confession of like, I've been out with other people and you have every right to divorce me. And I think going through the whole gamut of emotions, I was hurt, I was very angry at him. I would feel like I'd get a handle on it and then I would just revisit and it would just relive all of that. In that moment of all that conflicting emotion, I went to the scripture, thinking that I knew it, but wanting to know, where do I go from here? And in the portions of scripture that tell us for adultery we can divorce, all I saw was that he'd only give that because of the hardness of the people's heart. And I recognized that my heart was hard, but there I know by the grace of God that he helped me to understand that there was some higher purpose and that I didn't want to stay in that place of hardness. And so I just felt I was to stay. He was going to do something bigger than I knew.
Although Delbert returned to Jenny and the kids, he was still running from God deep in his heart. After 2 years at home, the old urge to escape his marriage returned, and he devised a plan. He would unload all of his sin and darkness onto Jenny. He was sure that it would be too much for her, and once she divorced him, he would be free to pursue his sin. So one night, he told her he struggled with homosexuality.
I can remember that night of feeling like, of all sins, this was one I'd never be able to share with anybody. So again, that profound feeling of aloneness, because I would have to carry this. But in the middle of all that, I can remember going to bed that night with a little sense of hope, probably the best hope I'd had for several years, that maybe with him being honest now, we would be able to move past that wall that had been between us and move towards really reconciling our relationship.
But Delbert wasn't really interested in reconciling. He had already done everything that he could think of to get free. He'd been to the altar, cried out to God, been to secular and biblical counseling, and nothing had changed. His pastor could see that things were about to explode. So he met with Delbert and Jenny in a last-ditch effort to talk Delbert out of his plan to abandon Jenny and the kids.
So after meeting with our pastor, he had asked me, he said, are you willing to take some drastic steps some drastic measures of discipleship. And I said, sure, I felt like at this point that I had done everything that I know to do. So what was one more thing? But I did let them know at the end of this conversation that I was going to do what they wanted me to do. But at the end, I was going to do whatever I wanted to do, because I was convinced that nothing would change in me.
So, that was that. Delbert would go to Pure Life Ministries, but when he was finished, he would pursue his life of sin. At least, that was his plan.
So when I was in the program, I saw many people from many denominations seeking after the same thing, freedom in Christ. It blew me away to see that there was actually people living it out and able to be free in Christ. It was at that moment that I realized that there was hope for me. The main thing that the Lord showed me, that I was a great manipulator and that I did very well protecting my world. But in the process of me protecting my world, I was very mean to my wife. I was selfish. I was full of pride. I drained people just being around them. I was not good to be around. I was angry. I was an angry person, full of jealousy. I was full of myself. The only thing I cared about was fulfilling my selfish desires.
So as I began working with a counselor from Pure Life Ministries, I think I was able to recognize that I had placed the blame of a lot of these things onto Delbert, because I had expected him to be able to help fix this loneliness and this isolation that I dealt with, and sought him for the connection. I recognized that it wasn't that I loved him, it was I loved me, and that I was my own idol. And I think as I progressed through it, I recognized that I didn't know how deep it ran, but I kept running into different situations and scenarios where I realized I was more important than anything, even the Lord. And so those were little points along the way where I just had to keep repenting and turning those back to the Lord.
So it was on a Sunday morning. I was in the student center listening to one of my CDs, and the Lord, in His mighty presence, came down in a way that was just beyond a miracle for me, and began to just touch me, just began to tear away all of my doubts, all of my fears, all of my unbelief that I could no longer be changed. It was at that moment I realized that He changed me. The pursuit of the Lord became so real to me that I wanted to pursue Him. So my devotional life became alive. My prayer life became alive. My walk in Him became alive. I now had a joy in my heart that I never had before. There was a newness. There was something different. There was just a renewing. It was something that I had hoped for my whole life. And it was my encounter with Jesus in Pure Life that caused me to realize that life was never going to be the same.
God had really done a miracle in me, because for the first time I recognized even if the marriage was over or would be over, I was going to be okay. I found in Jesus what I'd looked for all of these years. But the Lord was also working another miracle, because the marriage wasn't over. And I began to see in Delbert like a whole change, and a different man, and different desires, and a different pursuit, and a different level of intensity in which he was seeking the Lord. And it came out in many ways, but some of it was just the kindness that he showed and the concern that he showed, and I just watched God fulfill miracles after miracles. There was a Sunday when a woman come to our church to share. She shared about some really difficult things that she said she never dreamed that she would share. But she said, I will not be silent while others struggle. And I realized at that point that what we went through, changed us, but it wasn't just for us or about us, and that God really had a higher purpose.
And at the church, I was asked to share my testimony of what the Lord had done for me at Pure Life. I was a little apprehensive at first in sharing because I had heard the comments that men would make and the different things that guys would say about people who struggle. But after sharing my testimony, I was amazed at how many other men would come to me and open up about the things that they struggled with.
We realized that after sharing that people didn't push us away, they actually embraced us. And I think by us being willing to be open about it, it gave people the opportunity and realized that they could also share. And so as we shared even in different places, the need just become very, very real. But we realized God just did the impossible for us. And if He did the impossible for us, He would do it for others.
I've heard my mom say often throughout the years that they were hopeless and God came and gave them hope and set them free. This new way of life that my parents were living showed me just how selfish that our lives were before and how it really is God's will for us to give our lives away.
God was really beginning to have His way with them now. It was so real to them that God's mercy could transform even the most hopeless people. And this inspired them to take God's light into very dark situations. Take, for example, a young girl named Christy. Jenny had begun volunteering at a Christian drug rehab in Columbus, Ohio, and Christy was there, desperately looking for freedom from drug addiction. When Christy met Jenny, she was powerfully drawn to something inside her.
She loved the Lord, and she was always very expressive of how good He was to her and how faithful He was to her. And I just remember thinking, she just really loves this person that I've never met. I've known about him, and I've heard about him, and how he saves people's lives and does all these great things. But for her, I knew she had met the Lord. I didn't feel like any of God's promises were for me. I thought that the Lord couldn't forgive me for those things. I thought that I just thought that my past excluded me from all those promises. And honestly, I didn't know anyone that lived in those promises. I honestly didn't personally know anyone that lived in the promises of God, except for Miss Jenny. I just remember feeling I couldn't do that. I can't do that. I'm not good enough. I've wasted my life. Everything God had given me, I'd lost. Miss Jenny made me feel like I could change. She was probably the only person at first that made me believe that. I had a lot of stuff to kind of walk through, a lot of hard stuff that I've walked through in my life, and I never shared with anyone because I didn't trust anyone. And when I was able to finally share those things with her, she made sure she came back to me and said, "Christy, I still love you. I still love you no matter what." Just like the Lord would do. And I think at that point, I realized that it didn't matter all the things that I had in my heart and all the things that I had done wrong in my life, that if this woman could love me, that's standing in front of me, a sinful person as well as me, if she can still love me, then I know that the Lord has to love me. So we were sitting in devotion, and she asked me and a few other girls in the program, and no one ever asked me this question before, but what would you do if you had no limits? And she told us to write it on a piece of paper. I remember thinking, oh, it would be so cool to help women just like her, to be a director of a program, or just to help women, just women that'd been through the same stuff that I'd been through. And At the end of the devotion, she specifically came up to me and said, "So, Christy, what did you write on your piece of paper?" And I was like, "Oh, she's like, "Let me see it." And I was like, "Okay." And I gave it to her, and she's like, I know the Lord can do this for you, Christy." 6 years later, the Lord did exactly what I had written on that piece of paper. He made me a director of a women's program here in Columbus. I got to be able to pour out what the Lord had poured into me and just watch people become free from all that stuff, all the sin and just garbage that they were carrying.
This is the beauty and power of mercy. God finds a life that has been ruined by sin and selfishness, a life that has been used to bring ruin to others, and He pours in His light and life. And that life, changed and transformed by mercy, begins to bring the light to others.
Ashley had came in to our interview process, and the woman that sat in front of me kind of honestly reminded me of me years before. I just remember looking in her eyes, and there was no one occupying her body. She was just, it's like she wasn't there. But I remember thinking, well, God, if you can change my life the way you have, I know you can change hers. The Lord really did incline my heart to pray specifically for Ashley every day. I prayed Psalms 1 over her every day. I have her name written in my Bible where I prayed that for her because I believed that the Lord was going to change her heart and that her heart would be just like what Psalms 1 says, where it says that her love will be for the instruction of the Lord, and she will be upon it. Her heart will be upon it day and night, and she would not be like the wicked. I passionately prayed that every day.
I was so tired and so desperate I would have went anywhere. Thank God the Lord placed me in good hands. You could tell from looking at Christy that she had a story. We were given an assignment to do questions. It was a kind of a confession exercise. And I did them for almost a month straight. And I remember after a month, Christy looked at me and she said, "You're not being honest. You're not being real." And I got angry. I said, "Okay, all right, you want me to be honest? You want me to be real? I'm going to tell you." I started to write down my craziest thoughts, the thoughts that I never shared, and just took it to like the bottom, the deepest that it could go, until there was nothing more to talk about. I went as dark as I could. The next day she came back after I gave her the papers because I didn't hear anything from her, and nothing was changed. There was nothing about her when she came into the house that was different towards me. I knew she read them, but I knew that the love and the steadiness was still going to be the same. I remember waking up one day and I remember having all these crazy thoughts, and I remember thinking, okay, I'll still remember those things, but for the first time I remembered that I didn't want to go back. It was a new desire that God was giving me in a different direction and in a new way. And I remember thinking, okay, even if it gets even harder than what it's been, I know that I don't want to go back. And the desire to want to do all those things was gone. He had taken it. I started to get hungry for the supernatural things that was happening inside of me. My heart was being changed. My mind was being changed. The scriptures in the Bible, when I was reading it, it was like life. It wasn't death anymore. It was life. And so I started to be so attracted to what he was doing in my personal life that I wanted as much of it as I could get.
Ashley was becoming a totally different person now, and she knew it. God had shown her incredible mercy, and her life was becoming a blessing to the women around her. But when God began to use Ashley to bring blessing into her own son's life, this was almost too much to bear.
When I started to realize that the Lord was using my old life to transform me and for the good, and then I started to see how much it was impacting my son, Doran, I was ready. I was ready to live for him. I was ready to give up whatever he wanted me to. His power and his love and his grace was something that I couldn't comprehend.
So Christy was the first one to come into our lives. But from there, we had multiple individuals that needed a place to go, from being homeless, prison, just right off the streets. You know, they just, the endless needs of people were just out there, and we just began to open our home to it.
When an individual came to us and we recognized their need, we were basically there just to try to help meet that need. Sometimes that was a vehicle, sometimes that was a job, sometimes that was some counsel. But whatever it was, we had just determined that whatever need was in front of us, we would do whatever we could to meet that need.
We never thought in our wildest dreams that we'd ever start a ministry. But as we begin to see needs, we just begin to meet them. And this is how the covering began.
The Covering is actually a faith-based residential and transitional home for women and for children. And I think the unique thing about the Covering is the premise of it is a family. And it is ran in a style of a family with the covering of a mother and a father, and provide a safe spot for women and for children that are struggling with any kind of life-controlling issue. A place where they can grow, where they can go on and be discipled, and they can do that in a family environment. Part of the discipleship here at the Covering is that loving and nurturing, but confronting sin is an act of love. And so each of these women will have come face to face, as we have, with our own selfishness, with our own fears, with our own dominating sins in our life. And we're able to do that in an environment that says you're loved, but we're going to love you enough to be truthful, because it's the truth that sets us free.
My role here at the Covering is the outreach director. I see the Lord changing the women's lives through love, through family, through His grace, through opportunity that they've never had. They've never had a place to be planted into a family of love. So I can see the Lord transforming them.
I'm the administrative director at the Covering, and the Covering, I think, changes women's lives by when they come to this point that says, I want to be done. I want to be out of this life and I need something else. And so we get to catch them there, right? And then we get to kind of hold them in this in-between space, because a lot of times they get to, I'm done with this old, but I don't really know what this new looks like yet. So we hope that they see that in us, and we can model the joy of the Lord, also the obedience and the suffering and the denying yourself, but man, the joy and the hope and the love and the purpose that's in being part of God's family. And then our hope is that as we kind of help hold them here and settle them and make them safe here, they're able to make a second decision, which is to follow the Lord with their whole lives.
What is the impact of a life changed at Pure Life Ministries? You're seeing it. Delbert and Jenny were hopelessly lost. Their lives were defined by sin, hypocrisy, and selfishness. But God looked beyond the wreckage of their lives and saw what He could do through them. So He brought them to Pure Life Ministries, lavished them with His mercy, and sent them out to give to others what they had received.
Our lives would not be what they are today without Pure Life Ministries. Through what we experienced at Pure Life Ministries, God completely changed our direction, our mindset, our whole lives completely, and set us on a whole new course. Learning to do mercy and to love others in the way that Christ loved us has truly, truly changed who we are today.
Whenever we're able to share our story, whether individually or in a group setting, Pure Life is a big portion of that because of the change that the Lord made in our life while we were there. We got to see this lived out in a real way, people laying down their lives for the gospel and really living out biblical principles, not mixed with another diluted form of Christianity, but the purest form of biblical living. And it's challenged us to lay down our lives and live like that.
So the first time that I came to a Pure Life conference last year, I remember coming into the Ark, and I remember the atmosphere inside the Ark it was a whole nother level of seriousness with the Lord. And I had never seen anybody be that serious and that humble in the presence of the Lord. I started to get curious about that. I wanted to be more involved in some way with what you guys teach. So I've watched the sermons, I've listened to the podcast, all of it, even though it's rooted out of a certain sin, all of it can be applied to your walk with the Lord. All of it.
We at The Covering have been so blessed to receive from Pure Life because the staff and the leadership there are pursuing the presence of the Lord and desiring Him above all things. And they want to see others love Him and delight in Him as well. And so they do that through media. Pure Life is able to care for people through their YouTube channel and social media. And then they also do that at the residential program. And then they do that for people like us at home who just want to follow the Lord and what He's given us to do, to build family, to love those around us. And we can do it better because of how Pure Life has equipped us.
I think of Pure Life Ministries as a light into darkness, because it really was the light into our darkness. And now we've endeavored to take that light and to take it to the darkness around us, and then to encourage those ones to take that light further into the darkness. There are still untold, unmet needs. There's untold darkness that just needs the light of the gospel. And this isn't just our story, it's anyone's story that's willing to take the light of the gospel, and to carry it to where the darkness is. Anyone that's willing to let Him write our stories and us just go out and tell the story and to take that light to this dark world.